Dean looked at Dave and said, "Dude, I'm starving. I got your back if you go to Gino's and get us some subs? My treat." "Dude, it's on the other side of town. It'll take me at least 30 minutes to get there. Why don't we just order takeout? We'll be done faster that way." "Yeah, I know. But we deserve a treat, and the boss is paying for it. He never said we should get anything close, you know? All he cares about is that we finish this program as soon as possible and let him know when we're leaving so he can close our timesheets and set our alarms. Come on, man." "Okay, you're the boss," Dave said, getting up to leave the cavern they called the programming room and server room. Dave knew the roads were crowded on Friday nights. Plus, Gino's was on the other side of town and was a popular night spot. He'd only been there once, but had to admit that for bar food, it couldn't be better. Their sandwiches and even their pizza were top-notch. Dave had to drive through the parking lot twice before he found a parking spot and, naturally, parked at the back entrance. On his way to the building, he passed a car that looked like his wife's car, but it couldn't have been. She was at home with her sister, who had come to visit her on her way home from college. When he got to the bar, he walked to the cash register next to the kitchen and stood there until the waitress stopped to ask what he wanted. "I'm Dave Brown. I need to place an order over the phone, please." "Sure, dear. I'll see if it's ready now." The waitress left for the kitchen and returned almost immediately. She said, "I couldn't find an order for you. Are you sure you called it in here?" "Yes, my work partner called almost 20 minutes ago. I drove across town to pick him up. Are you sure you don't have him?" "No record of it. Who did he talk to?" "I don't know. Let me call him." Dave quickly pulled his cell phone out of his pocket and called Dean. When he answered, Dave asked, "Hey, they don't have our order. Didn't you call?" "Yeah, man. You were standing there listening to me, weren't you?" "Oh, shit. Well, go wait for them to make it since you're already there. I got your back. I just talked to Tony. He called to see how long I thought we'd be here. I told him at least another 2 or 3 hours, so we have time." Dave checked Dean's order one more time and turned to the waitress. He said he called here. Look, I work across town and we're running late. Could you ask them to hurry up so I can get back in time?" "Yes, of course, dear. What will you have?" Dave gave her the order and settled into a chair at the bar, waiting for the food to arrive. While waiting, he was watching the customers when he got the shock of his life. He saw his wife Sandy dancing with his boss Tony, and then he saw her sister dancing next to her as well. What the hell? Dave was about to walk over and find out what was going on when suddenly his world came crashing down. Sandy stood up on her toes and kissed her partner. Dave quickly snapped a couple of pictures and turned to follow them out of the bar. They walked across the parking lot to the row where Sandy's car was parked. Dave managed to get a couple more shots while they kissed. When they got to Tony's super truck, they climbed inside and got in it. While his heart was breaking, he took pictures on his phone. He smiled to himself when he heard Sandy ask, "Honey, what's that flashing light?" Tony replied, "Don't worry, honey. It's probably the headlights of passing cars. Relax. No one can see us." An enraged Dave wrapped a handkerchief around his head, like the robbers did in old westerns, and swung the door open in front of the lovers. He dragged Tony out of the car, kicked him, and then rummaged through his pockets for his wallet and keys. He slid the keys into the keyhole on the back door of the truck and took the wallet with him. He hoped the two lovers wouldn't see the keys and the truck would eventually be stolen. He planned to throw the wallet out the window as he drove through a bad part of town on his way to the office. Dave quickly made his way back to the bar and took his seat. Soon the waitress came over and said, "There you are. I thought you left or something. Your order is ready." "No, I was here the whole time. I was talking to a friend of mine. I apologize for not noticing you earlier." "No problem. Here's your food." "Thanks," Dave said, took his food, and walked out of the bar. He took roundabout routes to his car to avoid being seen by his cheating wife and boss. Before he got into the car, he saw Sandy helping Tony into the truck and trying to calm him down. During the drive through town, Dave was shaking with anger. Twice he almost had an accident because of it. He finally pulled into the parking lot of his office and entered the building, bringing his food with him. Remembering to close the door behind him, he angrily headed towards the server room where they worked. When he entered the room with the food, Dean smiled and said, "About damn time you got back. What have you been up to? Popped home for a bit?" Dave tossed the bag of food onto Dean's workstation and nearly collapsed into the chair next to him. Dean turned and yelled, "What the hell?" He stopped when he saw Dean's face and then continued, Holy shit, you okay, man? Yeah, no, not really. Sandy was there. She was having fun with Tony in the back of his truck. Shit, dude, I'm sorry. Yeah, but it's not your fault. Yeah, dude, in a way, it is my fault. Dave turned to Dean, anger reflected on his face. He asked, "What do you mean by that, asshole?" You know I'm a systems administrator. I was checking my email to make sure it was only being used for business, and I came across a group of messages from Tony and Sandy. They agreed to meet there tonight. He said he'd keep you busy here, and they could have some quiet fun. Dude, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to say anything in case she blew him off or it wasn't what I thought it would be, so I sent you out for sandwiches to make sure everything was okay. That's why I didn't call. I wanted you to stay there longer in case things turned out to be wrong. Yeah, but it didn't. I've got some great triple X-rated pictures of them having fun in the back seat. Sorry, Dave. What's next? You ask? I'm going to release this bitch and get out of this shitty job. As you might expect, neither man could work anymore that evening. They spent quite a bit of time discussing Dave's next steps. Dave showed Dean the pictures and told him what he had done to Tony as well. Dean laughed and said, "That's good. If he shows up here for work tomorrow, we'll have to be sure we give him a serving of shit, especially if he moves carefully." Dave sat in the chair for a bit longer, then got up and started to gather his things. Dean watched him for a bit, then said, "Hey kid, are you leaving? We're not done yet, and I won't have time to finish without you." "Yeah, I'm leaving. Screw Tony and his goddamn job. Sorry, man." "Dave, wait a minute. You can't just pick up and leave. What are you going to do? Go home and bump into that bitch? What about Tony? You can't just let him walk away. You gotta plan it, or you're gonna lose more in the divorce than you have to. Come on, man. Let's get this over with and make plans for you. They don't need any more warning than you have to give them." It was 2:30 in the morning when they had finished their project and could go home. They were standing in front of the door to the office when Dean tried to call Tony to remotely lock the doors and set off the security alarm. For some reason, he didn't answer. As they tried to call him, they laughed at the fact that he didn't answer. Finally, after 20 minutes, Dean called the head of security and said he couldn't reach Tony and needed him to lock the doors and set off the alarm. Before they got into their cars, Dean said, "You know, this is the bull. It's the only place I've ever worked where I didn't have a key and an alarm code. If something goes wrong inside after hours, we'll have to wander around the neighborhood until Tony or the guard on duty meets us here or unlocks and disables the alarm." Dean looked at himself strangely for a moment, then said, "You know, it hit me. The only time we have to call Tony is when we're working late. I think maybe it's because he's messing around with other wives too. I don't know, but I don't care. I'll make him pay for that too. I'm tired. I'll see you tomorrow." "Well, I guess I'll see you tonight. See you then." Sandy still wasn't home when Dave walked into their little rented house. He was still angry about what he had seen and wanted to argue with her, but he was glad she wasn't there. He wondered where she was, but figured she was probably with the jerk. Dave took a quick shower and fell into bed. He fell asleep almost as soon as he lay down and knew nothing until the sun hit his eyes at 9:30 the next morning. Pulling back the covers, he noticed that Sandy on his side of the bed was already fully awake. Before getting dressed, he made his way to the kitchen and set the coffee brewing. After drinking the coffee, having a quick breakfast of a frozen sandwich, and drinking more coffee, Dave went to work. He was still very angry and was trying to figure out how to make Tony and Sandy pay for what they had done. When he got to work, he found everyone there except Tony. He asked Sheila, Tony's secretary, where he was, and she said, "I don't know. I haven't heard from him at all." It had been a long day because Dave and Dean were still exhausted from the late work, but the project was in its final stages. The rest of the group was busy checking code and trying to download the program before installing it on the customer's servers. Dave was shuffling from foot to foot, watching the work and trying to stay awake. He was having trouble concentrating on his work because of the discovery he had experienced the day before. Finally, it was time for dismissal, and he came home. Sandy was lying on the couch with a glass of wine, dressed in her old tattered robe. She had large dark circles under her eyes. When he entered the room, she looked up at him with a guilty expression on her face. Dean immediately asked, "Where the hell were you last night? You didn't even call to say you wouldn't be home. And then you didn't even show up at all. And where's your sister? I thought she was going to stay with us for a couple days." "She got a call and had to leave early. I took her to the airport yesterday afternoon, and on the way home I stopped for drinks with the girls. It was horrible. One of them got mugged in the parking lot, and I spent the night in the hospital with her. I'm sorry I didn't call, but the battery in my phone was dead. And you couldn't find a phone at the hospital, borrow a charger, or use the nurses? I just didn't think. I'm so sorry, honey. Yes, of course you are. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were fooling around somewhere. What are we having for dinner? I haven't gotten to that yet. What do you want? I don't know. Something quick. I'm tired. I didn't leave until 3:30 last night, and I didn't fall asleep until 3. I really don't have anything quick. Why don't I order a pizza? Yeah, okay, I'll go get cleaned up. As Dave showered, he kept thinking about getting revenge and getting out of the mess Sandy had made of their marriage. While he was showering, an idea occurred to him that seemed like it would work and would be a sure way to find out about Sandy's infidelity. Tony had only a rudimentary knowledge of computers and programming. He was the business manager of the company, but only had a small degree in programming. He considered himself an expert and was constantly causing problems for his employees. His attempts at programming showed Dave how inept he was. Dave decided that he would create a web page and put pictures of Tony and Sandy on it. He would then send himself an email with the website address so he could legally find out about their date. He was to hack into Tony's home or office computer and use it to create a page using Tony's name, address, and personal information. He went to an internet cafe that same day and set to work, having first hacked into Tony's home computer. Before he started setting up the web page, he, like most hackers, scanned the hard drives to see what he could find. Jackpot. He found pictures of Tony with several other women. 2 of them, Dave knew, were married to men who worked with him. Copying the folder of photos to his computer, Dave quickly got to work on the web page. It took him several days to complete the programming and get the site up and running. Every action had to be completed and published on Tony's home computer to make it look like he was the one doing the work. Some days, he was unable to work on the site for personal reasons or because Tony turned off his computer. Once the site was up and running, he started thinking of other ways to get revenge. A few days after the site was up and running, Dave prepared a letter with a link that he sent out to everyone he could find who knew Tony, Sandy, or the other women. Supposedly, that's how he found out about Sandy's infidelity. Upon receiving the letter, Dave told Sandy about it and got all the excuses from the cheater's handbook. Sorry, honey, it's no big deal. It was just a one-time thing. I just ran into him there when my sister and I went out to eat, etc., etc. Dave returned to work the next morning and confronted Tony, then quit on the spot, leaving Tony with another bruise on his face. The divorce quickly turned nasty, with Sandy first trying to get Dave to reconcile and then starting to countersue. During this time, feelings flared up in her, and she decided to get revenge on Dave for daring to divorce her. She turned him in to the prosecutor for running an internet gambling site. The site was Dave's brainchild and started as a hobby where he and his friends played Texas Hold'em with each other. The site soon grew and grew until Dave opened it up to everyone around the world. Everyone who joined the site received 2,000 K chips, no cash equivalent, and another 1 million each day as a bonus to play. When the site first opened, if a person lost all their chips, they could only play again the next day. After the site had been running for 2 months, Dave, as the administrator, received so many requests for additional chips that he created a way for people to purchase them and continue playing. It wasn't a gambling site, per se, because no one received anything in return for their payments other than the right to continue playing with the chips they received or purchased. Dave had been running the site for over a year when his marriage broke up and was making obscene amounts of money from it. When he found out about Tony nailing Sandy, he was ready to quit his job and devote all his time to the site, but first he wanted to finish the project he and Dean had been working on. Over the past year, he had added other card games and even slot machines to the site. He was amazed at how much money people sent him to buy chips for the games and never won anything but extra chips that they ended up losing. Now he was happy that all his purchases went directly into a bank account in the Cayman Islands. He was registered with the company and only received a minimum wage from it. As far as he knew, no one even realized that he was the sole owner of the company. He knew that Sandy thought he was just a contract programmer. Now he was glad that was the case. She might be able to get some of his small salary from the web company, but probably not. Since he'd left Tony's company, he'd been making less than she was. During the divorce proceedings, Sandy turned Dave in to the police as the owner of an online casino. They investigated and called him in for questioning twice, but since he was a salaried employee and none of the players got anything for their money except chips for the next game, they found no reason to prosecute. Her attempts to get him in trouble only made him even angrier, and he became even more intransigent about the divorce. Finally, after 7 months of fighting, the divorce was final. Dave was ordered to provide Sandy with minimal support for 3 years on the basis that he was still working at the time of the divorce. She graciously agreed to take a lump sum in lieu of monthly payments, and Dave was a free man. He didn't want to stay in the city where his life had become hell, so he decided to leave. Dave loaded all his belongings into a truck and a 14-foot trailer and hit the road, to parts unknown. One of his first stops had to be a nice river where his grandfather and father used to take him fishing. They would camp on the gravel bank, catch clean, and eat fish right there. Damn, his mouth watered at the memory of it. Dave found a gravel strip and set up camp just in time for an evening of fishing on the creek. The fish were nibbling and he had a lot of fun, quickly forgetting why he had come, and began to enjoy his time on the river. He camped, swam, and fished for 2 days before he ran out of drinks and provisions. After leaving camp, he got in his truck and drove to the nearest town where there was a grocery store. The town was small, only 850 people if the sign was to be believed, but it still had a small grocery store and a cafe where all the farmers gathered when they had free time. As he drove by, Dave looked sadly at the little town. He remembered that in the years of his youth it had been much larger and busier. Some of the old houses stood empty, and many of the smaller ones were almost falling apart. There were a few "for sale" signs hanging on the empty houses, and he wondered how long ago they had been up for sale. Some of the yards looked like they hadn't been mowed all year and probably hadn't been mowed in previous years either. One of the nicest and largest houses from last year was completely hidden from the road by the trees and shrubs that sprawled across the yard. Only the glow of metal on the roof could be seen through the treetops. This house belonged to one of the doctors who worked at the city hospital, now closed. It once had 40 beds and was often completely filled with patients. Now it was just another empty building on the main street of town. So sad. Dave was surprised to find that the local small private telephone company was still in operation. They had old equipment, installed years ago when his grandfather had a small cabin on the river nearby. Now he was curious. Before buying groceries, Dave decided to treat himself to a meal at the cafe. To his surprise, once inside, he found that the phone company had modernized. They now provided internet and cable TV service over their lines. After eating a very tasty burger, Dave walked back to his truck and pulled out his computer. He quickly settled down at a quiet table and began working on his website, doing the work he couldn't do on the river using his phone as a hotspot. There were curious glances thrown at him, but no one bothered him, except for the waitress asking if he needed anything. He was completely immersed in his work. As he closed his laptop, the owner of a small cafe approached him and said, "You don't see this sort of thing around here very often. I'm thinking of discontinuing my internet subscription since no one but a few kids use it. I haven't seen you here before. If you don't mind me asking, what have you been doing for so long? I've heard you typing, more than if you were just sitting on the internet. Are you new in town?" "Yeah, no, I don't mind. I'm vacationing on the river while I recover from a nasty divorce. When I was a kid, my grandfather and I used to fish and camp near here, and I loved it. I decided to see if it would help me relax. As for what I've been doing, I have a website and I've been doing some things on it that I couldn't do as well using my phone as a hotspot. I hope you don't mind." "No, it's fine. That's why we set up the internet. Partly for ourselves and to help, but I was hoping it would attract customers as well. The phone company gave me a basic video package for free for advertising if I agreed to pay for the internet, and I agreed." "And how long do you plan to work here?" "I don't know exactly. I guess until I get tired and want to move on. Everything I own is in my truck or trailer. I left my old house after my divorce and planned to just drive until I found a place I wanted to stop. This was my first stop and I haven't gotten tired of it yet." "Wow, free legs and freedom of imagination. It must be great." "In a way it is, but I've always wanted to find a place and a job to my liking, put down roots, find a good woman and start a family. It hasn't worked out with that so far, so I'm off to wander again." "Well, good luck. I need to get back to the kitchen. Let me know if you need anything else." Dave watched as the woman turned and walked back to the kitchen. Before she entered the kitchen, he called out to her, "Hey, if it's not too much trouble, could you get me a salad, another burger and fries? And what time does the grocery store close?" "Sure, honey, I'll get it right away. You might want to stop by the store before you eat. They close at 6 and it's 5:30 now. If you don't, you won't have time to eat before they close. If you want, I can wait a few minutes while I make you dinner and you buy the groceries." Dave smiled and said, "Thanks, I'll do that. Be right back," and got up and headed for the door. Dave walked down the street about a block and entered a small grocery store. He quickly went through the rows, picking items from his list: canned soup, bread, chips, and a few cans of vegetables. Then he headed to the refrigerators where he picked up lettuce, cheese, lunch meat, and even a couple small steaks. Like most small-town stores, the prices were considerably higher than in the big cities, but having no business in a big city when you considered the cost of fuel, they were quite reasonable. He quickly paid for his purchases and walked back to his truck where he put the cold groceries in the refrigerator. The truck was equipped with an inverter, so cooling didn't require ice. The small camping generator on the trailer charged the batteries, so he could use it on the river, as well as for lighting at night and charging his computer and phone. Dave returned to the cafe and smiled when he saw the hostess carrying a salad to the table he had been sitting at all day. She placed the salad, dressing, and a few crackers in front of his chair and said, "Here you go. I put the burger down for you when I saw you packing the groceries in the truck. It won't take long." By the time Dave finished his meal, there were several other customers in the small cafe. Some were singles, a few couples, and one family. When he paid, the woman thanked him for his business and said, "I hope you'll come again. It was nice to have someone here during the day. It can be lonely here sometimes. If you are still here, come join us for lunch on Sunday. My specialty is fried chicken with all the spices. Well, of course, we have the usual dishes too. You know, I think I'll probably come." "Thanks," Dave said and turned to leave. A few days later, Dave returned to town and the first thing he did was head to the cafe. Once inside, he stopped for some reason and looked at the bulletin board on the wall next to the cash register. There hung a list of properties for sale and one notice on county letterhead that the lot on the courthouse steps would be auctioned off for non-payment of taxes. The sale will take place next Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Twyla, the owner of the cafe, saw him looking over the list and smiled before greeting him. "Good to see you again, Dave. How are you?" "Good, Twyla. I needed to get some groceries, so I thought I'd stop by for another one of your delicious burgers." "Okay. Do you want one now or can you wait a bit?" "I think I'll wait." He picked up his computer case and continued. "I thought, if you don't mind, I'd do a little work first." "Sure. Can I get you anything right now?" "Yes, unsweetened iced tea would be nice." When Twyla brought him the tea, she asked, "Saw you looking at the bulletin board. Are you looking for something or just looking?" "Mostly just looking. I started looking at the auction listings and then I saw all the properties for sale. What surprised me was that all the properties were being sold for non-payment of taxes. I thought there were only 3 or 4. Yes, there are. The same ones year after year, with only the occasional new one. One of them is old Doc Fisker's house. It's been listed for 6 years and nobody's even put it up for auction. As far as we know, he had no family left after his death, and no one wants the house enough to buy it. Of course, that's not surprising. There are several houses for sale in town, and perhaps 1 or 2 a year sell." "Where is his house located, Twyla?" "You drive past it as you enter town. You can see the yard from here. See all those trees on the hillside by the creek? Every now and then, you can see the roof glisten when the sun hits it." "Yes, I can see that. It looks like a pretty big house. Strange that no one wants it." Once upon a time, it was not only the biggest house in town, it was also the swankiest. I don't know how it is now. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in pretty bad shape. Kids probably broke down the door and made a mess in there. A couple other empty houses burned down from them, getting in there and getting high on dope and setting them on fire. Dave didn't know why, but he was intrigued by the big house hidden in the thicket of the yard. He felt calmer and, surprisingly, happier in this small town than he had in months or even years. Every now and then while he worked, he would just sit and think about the old house and the tax sale. Finally, Dave managed to get his mind off the thoughts of the old house, and he got to work. At about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he closed the computer and leaned back in his chair. Twyla saw him and called out from the kitchen, "Are you ready for lunch, Dave?" "Yes, thank you, Twyla. I'm thinking another salad and a burger, but can we add onion rings to the burger today?" "Sure, I'll be right out," she said. While he waited for his portion, Dave made small talk with a couple of farmers who had not yet left after lunch. One of them said, "Been seeing you around for a couple weeks now. Did you move nearby or something?" "No, not really. Got rid of my cheating wife, quit my job when I found out she was with my boss, loaded everything I owned into a trailer and left. My grandfather used to bring me here in the summer to fish, so I camp on the same old gravel pad we used and try to relax. Every once in a while, I stop by here for groceries and one of Twyla's burgers. I use her internet to do the work I can't do using my phone as a hotspot." "I thought you said you quit your job. What kind of work were you able to do from the coffee shop?" "As a part-time job, I ran an internet gaming page and still do. I do housekeeping here and keep the site in order, so I still have some money." "Hmm, I don't know what half of that means. I guess you're just one of the guys I've heard about. Say, you're not the guy who lives in the old trailer on the river, are you?" "Maybe I am. I didn't piss anybody off, did I?" "No, Joe's used to people parking and fishing on that gravel strip. Hell, everybody's been doing that for years. As long as you don't tear anything up and let his cows out, he doesn't mind." Soon after that, the two farmers paid up and drove off. When Dave saw Twyla paying them off, he decided it was time for him to leave too. He paid the bill and went to the store to get groceries. After loading the groceries into the truck, he climbed in and started to drive out of town. For some reason, as he drove past the old doctor's house, he stopped. Dave wanted to see the old house. With great difficulty, he managed to get through the shrubbery, but he did get there. The house appeared to be 1.5 stories high, at least from the looks of it. He couldn't tell how many rooms were in the attic, but he was sure there were several. As you might expect, there were rotten boards on the walls, a wooden porch, and windows. Naturally, the old house was in dire need of a paint job. The windows were all old wooden single-pane windows, but surprisingly, not a single pane was broken. The galvanized metal roof still gleamed on the building. Dave felt guilty, but found a window that could be opened and climbed into the old house. For almost an hour, he wandered around the house, inspecting it. As far as he could tell, the old bones, the frame of the house, were still very good. The arrangement of the rooms was better than in most old houses. There were 2 outbuildings on the 4 or 5 acre lot, a detached 2-car garage and a small barn. When he finished looking around, he struggled to get out of the yard, climbed into his truck, and walked back to the trailer on the riverbank. For the next 3 days, Dave couldn't stop thinking about the old house and how much he liked the small town. Monday morning, he drove into town again and stopped at the old house. He walked down the same old path to the back of the property and looked at the buildings and grounds again. Something about the house attracted him, and he sat down on the steps of the old porch, looking out over the shrubby yard. It was almost noon when Dave returned to his truck and drove the short distance to the cafe to get lunch. As he took his order, Twyla smiled and asked, "What did you think of Doc's old house?" "What? Oh, come on, Dave. I can see the place from here like the back of my hand. And I saw you go in there last week and again this morning before you came here. Hell, half the town knows you've been hanging around. So what do you think?" "I don't know. Something about this place is calling to me, but it looks like it's going to take a lot of work to make it livable again. Just getting the yard cleaned up is a lot of work, and the whole house needs to be modernized. A lot of rotten boards need to be replaced, and I won't know about the framing until after I take off the siding or paneling inside. Apparently, I'll have to completely redo the wiring and plumbing. I just don't know. Yeah, I guess that's why no one bids anymore. And no one wants to live out here in the middle of nowhere anymore. So do you want another burger tonight or something else?" "Burger and rings, please, Twyla." Sitting waiting for lunch, Dave kept looking toward the old house. While he waited, he didn't even go to his website. The whole time he ate, he kept looking toward the house, and then he forced himself to log onto his computer and do the little work he had left to do. Soon he finished his work, and instead of going to the store to get groceries, he went back to his camp. He spent most of the day on the computer checking his finances, doing some bookwork, and programming a change of scenery on his website. There were over 50,000 players on his site, and they were spending an average of $5 a week to buy chips. Of course, some were good enough or lucky enough to never buy chips, while others bought them almost daily. If this trend continued, he would earn about $13 trillion. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Depending on the year and the value of the equipment, his profits were usually 15 to 20% of the total. Dave had had a restless night and got up just after dawn. Sipping his coffee, he watched the sun set behind the trees and reflected on his life and the day itself. Without even thinking about what he was doing, he filled a large insulated cup with coffee, got in his truck, and headed into town. This time he passed the small-town turnoff and pulled onto the highway leading to Knott City, the county seat. Finding a parking space, he pulled up to the courthouse just after 9:30 a.m. After confirming the location of the upcoming tax and court sale, he froze in anticipation. At exactly the appointed time, he was approached by the sheriff and two suits. A tall, thin man dressed in worn Levi's and a blue Western-cut shirt. His outfit was completed by cowboy boots and a white Stetson hat. The newly arrived men looked around at the half-dozen people gathered nearby before the sheriff spoke. "Good morning, everyone. We are preparing to auction off several foreclosed properties, as well as several properties that are delinquent on their taxes. If you are gathered here for that reason, please step closer and we'll get started." 3 or 4 people stepped back. The rest approached the men. The auctioneer stepped forward with a microphone and handed one of the suits a paper. He read the paper, then described the property, its address, the payment requirements, and the starting bid. The foreclosed property was sold first, and most of the bidders left, leaving only Dave and 2 others. Before the first property was described and the second part of the auction began, the tax sale rules were announced. The 2 farms were sold first, and Dave watched the other 2 bidders prepare to leave. The men looked at Dave and one of them said, "Are you here for the sale, sir?" "Yes. All the land is sold. All we have are a few old abandoned houses. Are you interested in one of them?" "Yeah, maybe I'm crazy, but I'm interested in one old house in Thomasville." One of the men flipped through the remaining papers, then asked, "Which one is it, sir? We have 3 packages to Thomasville." Dave gave the address and the man started looking at the papers for Doc's house. He looked them over and said, "The taxes on this place are $1,575, 9 years in arrears, and this year's taxes are due by December 31st. The minimum rate is the balance of the taxes, sir." Dave didn't even think about it. He said, "I bid $1,575. The men looked at each other. The auctioneer gave his speech, then put the gavel down and said, "Sold for $1,575. Dave spent the rest of the day in town, first processing the property and filling out all the paperwork, deeds, registration record, and even a permanent residence address to change his mailing address and legal residence. He registered to vote and even stopped by the power company to arrange for electricity. It was almost 4 in the afternoon when he left the store and headed back to Knott City. He parked outside the cafe and entered the cool lounge. As soon as he sat down at a table, Twyla came over to him and greeted him. "What are you going to do tonight, Dave?" she asked. "I think I'll have one of your chicken fried steaks, potatoes and gravy, and string beans tonight, please." "I won't say no. Where have you been all day? I didn't expect to see you for a couple more days since you weren't home yesterday." "Spent the day in town and didn't feel like cooking when I got back to camp." Dave was done with the food as soon as Twyla brought it over, paid the bill, and headed back to the campground. He parked, undressed, and dove into the cool, refreshing water for an afternoon swim. After his swim, he gathered up almost all of his stuff that had been lying around idle, almost all of it because he'd been gone all day, and sat down to watch the sun go down. The next morning, after a quick breakfast and morning coffee, Dave finished packing, hitched the trailer to the truck, and headed into town to his new home. During the hour of work, several people stopped and talked to him. Some watched for a few minutes while he removed brush and undergrowth from the rest of the driveway. It took all day to clear the driveway and a spot big enough to park the truck and trailer. Finally, he put the trailer in the right spot and unhooked it. Grabbing his bag, he headed for the creek at the edge of his property. There was a chest-deep hole there that was easy to reach, so he waded across and took a good swim, then went back to the trailer, took off his wet shorts, and changed into clean clothes. After he finished getting dressed, Dave walked almost 2 blocks to the cafe. He arrived fairly late, and the cafe already had half a dozen tables where customers were sitting, either eating or waiting for their portion. Dave took his usual table by the window and smiled as Twyla approached him with a glass of water. She placed the water on the table in front of him, smiled, and said, "Well, you're definitely going to be the talk of the town now. I can't believe you bought this old house. Isn't it in really bad shape?" "It's been better, but I believe it has strong bones. I'll have to spend some money on repairs, but when it's finished, I'll have a nice place to live. I could use some help, though. Do you know anyone who could help me take it apart and clean up the yard?" "Maybe. Have you looked on the bulletin board? Sometimes there's something there. I see you moved your trailer over to that yard over there. Will you be working there now?" "Yes, I'll be there or here, I suppose, for quite a while. I'm going to do as much of the work myself as I can." It took Dave almost 2 hours to eat and leave the cafe. Everyone in the building, all men and a few women, stopped by his table to talk about the old house. He even had a couple of leads for people who might be able to help him. Dave was in no hurry to finish the house, so he was in no hurry to hire help. Money didn't play a big part, but it was there. His income was in the Caymans, and he himself received only a small salary as an employee of his company, so he didn't have to pay U.S. taxes on the amounts he left offshore. If he used money from the business to do his job, he would have to pay tax on the excess amount. One morning, Dave was sitting under his favorite tree, resting from his exertion, when 2 young women entered the yard and cheerfully greeted him. Seeing them, Dave was almost at a loss for words. Both of them were tall for women, about 5 feet 8 inches or so, and cute as bug ears. He'd seen them both around town. The blonde sometimes worked at a coffee shop. He'd also seen another Hispanic woman sitting in a coffee shop, sometimes talking and laughing with the blonde. But he didn't know their names. They were both almost bouncing with suppressed energy, and the blonde smiled before saying, "Hi, Dave. We've been watching you work, and Mom said you've been talking about hiring help, but we haven't seen anyone helping you. We both work at the cafe for Mom, but we don't make much money. Tina and I were wondering if you would take us on as helpers." "So you're Twyla's daughter? I've seen you both around, but I didn't know." The blonde giggled and replied, "Yep, I'm Jen, well, Janice, but I address her by her first name, Jen, and this is Tina. We're twins and we do everything together." Dave looked at the 2 very different girls and said, "Twins?" Jen laughed and replied, "Well, we have different parents, but we're kind of twins. We were born on the same day but 20 minutes apart in the same hospital. That's why we call ourselves twins. We've always been best buddies. I've thought about hiring help, but I haven't decided yet. There are a few things that would be easier to do with help, but I don't have a lot of money, so I'm putting things off. I'm not really in a hurry to finish the job, so I'm letting things take their course. I just want to be able to move in before the cold weather hits this fall." The 2 girls looked at each other for a moment before Tina said, "Anything we can do will help a lot. We're both going to college this fall, and we need to make as much money as we can. We don't know much about construction, but we can do a lot if you show us how to do it." "Well, maybe I can help a little. I remember what it was like to be a poor college student." "What course are you in? What's your major?" Jan replied, "We are starting our sophomore year. I want to be an elementary school teacher, and Tina is going to study computer technology." They chatted for a few more minutes before Jan said, "We should get going. We promised Mom we'd help out a little today. I'll see you later." Dave watched the 2 beauties walk down the street and into the cafe. He watched them all the way. When they were out of sight, he got up and went back to his work. He was pulling windows out of the house and replacing them with triple-pane PVC windows. Each window opening had to be resized so that standard-sized windows could be used, rather than buying more expensive, custom-made ones. It was much cheaper, but much more labor-intensive. Shortly before noon, Dave excused himself and went to the cafe to have lunch. This time, as he walked inside and headed for his table, Jan and Tina jumped up and greeted him. Twyla was already heading to his table when she saw the girls walk up to him. She smiled and walked back into the kitchen where the girls had just come from. "Hi, Dave," Tina said. "What can we get you today?" "I think I'd like a chicken enchilada platter today, please, and an iced tea." Jen smiled and said, "I'll get it right away. You're going to love it. Tina and her mom made it, and they cook just fine." Finished with the food, Dave walked over to the cash register to pay. He smiled when Twyla greeted him. "I can't say this is the first time, but those two sure came by this afternoon. I usually have to ask them to wait at the table if I'm busy in the kitchen with Tina's mom. I've seen them here before, but today was the first time I met and talked to them. They came up and asked me for a job. They said you sent them." "What, you're kidding?" "No, I didn't suggest they ask you for a job. I just mentioned that you were talking about hiring someone part-time to help with the harder work. I can't believe they asked for help with remodeling. I won't say they are lazy, they are not, but they are very picky about what kind of work they will do. They help out here from time to time, but complain about it all the time. I can't believe they want to do the hard work they'll have to do if you hire them." "So you're not recommending them?" "No, I didn't say that. If you give them a job, they'll do their best to do it right, and they'll work honestly for their pay. I'm just surprised they took the job and asked you about it." "Oh, I didn't say anything about hiring them. I try to do as much as I can myself to save money, but I'll need help soon." "Do you think they're strong enough to do the heavy work? Do they know anything about construction at all?" "Jan doesn't know, but Tina's father is a contractor and she used to go to construction sites with him a lot when she was younger. I think she knows quite a bit." "So how was dinner? You surprised me by not taking your invariable hamburger tonight." Dave laughed and said, "It was really good. I still like your hamburgers, but I wanted to try something different, and I really like a good Tex-Mex. This would be perfect with chips and salsa. We talked about it, but we'll have to charge a little more, and we can't just bring them in early like the Mexican restaurants do." "I understand, but to me it's just Mexican food. You should work on a good pizza too. I don't feel like driving to the county center when I want pizza." Twyla laughed and replied, "You don't want much, do you? You know you can't have such a big menu in such a small place. Maybe you'd like to work here and pay for all that extra stock?" Dave laughed and said, "No, not really. I'm just saying." Twyla smiled and Dave stood up, getting ready to go back to his work. She followed him to the cash register and took the money, and then they went their separate ways again. The next morning, Dave had barely gotten to work when Jen and Tina showed up, dressed the same as the day before. "Hey, Dave," Tina said. "What are we doing today?" Dave frowned before answering. "Well, I was going to finish repairing the siding so I could paint it in the next day or two. What are you two doing today?" Ian looked a little guilty, or maybe scared, and said, "Whatever you want. We're willing to try anything." Dave didn't know what to say to that. The girls seemed to think he was going to hire them or had already hired them. He didn't know what to say or do, and just froze for a moment. The girls started to get worried and were about to leave when he finally spoke. "Well, if you're sure you want to do something here, I guess I could use some help, but you shouldn't be dressed for too dirty or heavy work." Dave looked around at the work that needed to be done, and a thought occurred to him. He was tackling the back of the house, replacing damaged siding and peeling boards, but the rest of the house was ready to be painted. He'd already stripped off the old paint that had come off and sanded the edges, so all that was left to do was paint. "I'll tell you what," he said. "I'm still working on the back of the house, but if you want to paint the outside of the house, you can do that. The paint is on the porch, and as you can see, I've still set up the scaffolding on the side so I can start on top." The girls smiled. Jen said, "Come on, Tina. Let's get started." They turned and hurried toward the house and their new job. Dave never knew how long the girls would be working or if only one of them would be there. Usually when one or both of them weren't home, he found them working in the caf when he went to lunch. Of course, he didn't always work from home because he had to work on his website from time to time. Sometimes he even did a bit of programming while distracted from his restoration work. He preferred to do it in the cafe because he didn't have the internet set up yet rather than in the house because it wasn't finished yet. By the end of the first week of work, the girls had finished painting one side and the front of the house. They had applied 2 coats of paint and everything looked amazing. They had also become very friendly with Dave, and he was sure teased him with their beautiful bodies. They had too many moments when he saw their tank tops, when they wore loose blouses, and a few times one or the other had donned a bloody miniskirt to go up the stairs and paint. On Friday of the first full week, Dave called them into the backyard where they usually sat and relaxed under their beer-drinking tree. As best he could, he kept track of their time and arbitrarily determined an hourly rate since none of them had discussed pay. When the girls came and sat down at his invitation, he handed each a wad of bills and said, "This is your paycheck for the last week and a half. Since we never discussed pay, I asked around and got a figure for the work you are doing. I hope it's enough." To his surprise, none of the women looked at or counted the money. Each of them simply stuffed it into the pockets of the tight shorts they were wearing that day. They had to stand up to do so, and as soon as the money was in their pockets, they both jumped up to him, leaned over, and to his surprise, bestowed a kiss on him. Tina said, "Thanks, Dave. I'm sure the pay is good, but you didn't have to do that. We never asked for a paycheck. We just wanted to help you. It's getting so boring here since most of our friends have left town and college is over. Besides," she said, "we like being with you. Why don't we come over tomorrow and hang out instead of work?" "Well, sure. I was going to do some things around the house, but you don't have to, of course." "No, I mean, could you not work, please, and let us just hang out, maybe have a little fun?" Dave thought for a moment and replied, "Sure, I guess. I don't have any deadlines. We're almost done with the exterior, and it can be finished before the cold weather sets in. That was my main plan for the summer. I want to do a couple rooms inside so I can move in before the cold weather hits. I'm sure I can get it done, so a day off will be just right." Both girls smiled and hugged him tightly before settling back down. They had a couple of beers each, after which the girls left. They needed to clean up and go help Twyla at the caf with the Friday night crowd. Dave was still sitting outside with his morning coffee when the two girls showed up the next morning. They appeared from around the corner of his house carrying a cooler in each hand. In the other hand, each had a bag of groceries. They quickly walked over to him, dropped their load, and leaned over to kiss him. Jen looked at him with a strange expression on her face and then asked, "You didn't like it?" "We're sorry." Tina looked at him sadly as Dave asked his question, and he hastily replied, "No, it's nothing like that. It's just that you surprised me. What sane single man wouldn't enjoy being kissed by two beautiful women? What did you bring? I thought we were just going to hang out and relax. Now I feel bad because I didn't bring anything special." "Don't feel bad. We just brought something to drink and hamburgers. We saw how much you liked your mom's hamburgers at the caf, and we wanted to sit down, so we brought them. You don't mind, do you?" "No, of course not. So what are you planning for the day since it's your party?" "Oh, nothing much," Ian replied. "Like we said, just hang out, have a few drinks, swim, and grill some burgers and dogs." Ian grabbed his arm and tried to pull him out of his chair. "Come on," she said. "Let's go swimming. It's too hot already to just sit around and drink coffee." Dave let himself be lifted to his feet and followed the laughing girls down the path that led from the yard to the deep swimming hole in the back of his property. It was only 150 feet away, and he could already hear people splashing and talking loudly while frolicking in the creek. He stepped back slightly and said, Wait, let me at least get my swim trunks." "Come on," Tina said. "These old shorts really suit us. Besides, we don't want to wait, we're hot." "Yeah, I can see that," Dave muttered. Jan smiled and said, "What did you say? You think we're hot?" "Yeah, but I'm sorry you heard that. I shouldn't have said that." "Gee, of course you should have. All women should know that their men think they're beautiful, especially if they mean it. That's what you meant, isn't it?" Tina clapped Jan on the shoulder and hissed, "Shut up, idiot." Dave was surprised at Jan and Tina's words, but decided he really hadn't heard them and let them pull themselves toward the creek. Soon they were already swimming and splashing in the water with the other couples, although it seemed that Jan and Tina spent most of their time talking and playing with Dave. After a few minutes, Jan disappeared and quickly reappeared, carrying 3 bottles of beer and a swim noodle. She handed 1 bottle each to Dave and Tina and then sat down on the noodles and sipped her beer while relaxing and talking to everyone. Dave soon joined in the conversation and began to get to know the other people in the water. To his surprise, he quickly found that he was really enjoying himself. Jan and Tina returned to the yard several times for beers, and at noon for sandwiches. Late in the afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Jan said, "Come on, you two, it's time for dinner." By then, all 3 of them were feeling the effects of the beer and thought the whole thing was hilarious. Most of their friends had left by then, and those who remained were cooking or eating their evening meal on the beach. By then, they'd had enough to drink to make the whole thing funny. Jen smiled, looked at Dave's face, and said with a giggle, "You can't even walk straight. How are you going to manage us, Davy? You have to cook the hamburgers. They need to be fried, and then we're going to have fun." Tina poured another shot of beer into Dave's hand while Jen fired up the nearby gas grill. Once the grill was fired up, the ladies started pulling things out of the refrigerator and the bags they had brought earlier. They quickly arranged the food in paper plates on the small table, then grabbed a glass of beer each and sat down with Dave while the grill heated up. When Jen decided the grill was hot enough, she said, "Dave, I think the grill is ready, and you can cook the hamburgers and sausages, and we'll get the buns ready for the meat." She and Tina giggled, walked over to the table and started making the buns for the hamburgers. Soon they were eating burgers, chips, and great barbecue beans that Jen had brought from her mom's cafe. After eating, they cleaned up and headed to the creek for a late afternoon swim. By the time they got back to the creek, everyone else had already left. After cooling off, all three of them returned to Dave's yard, then pushed him into the tent and put him on the bed. "Girls, what's going on here? Why are you doing this?" They both lifted up slightly to look him in the eye, and Ian said, "We've seen you watching us in the caf, almost from the first day you started coming. You've never been rude or obnoxious like most boys we've met, and your mom really likes you. None of us found anyone in the neighborhood or at college that we liked enough to date more than once or twice. You're the exception. We spent all summer with you and you never treated us badly. We wanted to date you and see if there could be something between us, but you never asked, so we decided to take matters into our own hands. Okay, I guess I can understand that. You know how much my wife hurt me, and I was afraid to go out with her again. Plus, you're almost 5 years younger than me. I didn't think you'd be interested, even if I asked." "Well, you're wrong. We were and are very interested. Look, I don't know what to say. I really like both of you and I love being around you. I can't even think about picking one of you." The girls smiled and hugged before Tina said, "Okay, we don't want you to choose. Like we said, we're twins. We do everything together and we don't want you to choose. You're stuck with both of us, Dave." The women soon noticed that Dave wasn't answering them and looked relaxed. They looked up and saw that Dave was sleeping peacefully. Jen said, "Wow, I can't believe he just fell asleep on us. Are we really that boring?" Tina laughed and replied, "Either that or we gave him too much beer. Of course, he's been working hard too." "Yeah, but damn, what are we going to do now?" "Sleep?" Soon, all three young men were asleep and none of them woke up until early morning. Dave woke up before the girls. His head was splitting. He quickly put the coffee pot on and started trying to recover from the day off. No sooner had he had his first cup of coffee than both women staggered out of his tent. They didn't even speak to him, hurrying into the house to go to the bathroom. Soon they were outside again and poured a cup of coffee each before sitting down and staring at Dave, sipping the magical elixir. After they had emptied the cup with minimal conversation, Dave looked at the women and said, "You are dangerous. Now I'm going to go to the caf and get some breakfast. Are you coming?" They looked at each other for a moment before Tina replied, "Yes, but I'm not sure I can eat much." As the three young people slowly walked into the cafe, Twyla looked at them, laughed, and said, "I heard you guys had a lot of fun. I hope you learned your lesson." Dave looked at her, stretched out in his usual chair with a young woman on either side of him, and said, "I resent that, Twyla. Contrary to rumors and someone else's plans, I remain as pure as the driven snow. They feed me demon rum, but they have failed to corrupt my morals." Jen blushed and, patting Dave on the shoulder, replied, "Hey, that's my mom. You don't have to say things like that to her. Besides, you didn't fight that much before you went to bed with us." Most of the male customers laughed when she said that, and Twyla replied, "You girls didn't fight. Oh, never mind. What will you have for Dave?" Dave ordered, and Twyla turned toward the kitchen. Ian said, "Mom, what about us? If you want something, come with me and make it yourself. You're not a paying customer." Ian and Twyla looked at each other, then stood up and slowly followed Ian into the kitchen. Everyone could hear muffled voices interspersed with the usual kitchen sounds. While the food was cooking, Dave got a few minutes of affectionate remarks from his friends and even a few warnings about the girls. Soon, Jen and Trina came out of the kitchen with plates of food, which they placed neatly on the table before sitting down at the table themselves and beginning their meal. There was little conversation again as all three of them tried to recover after a full day of partying. Dave finished his meal a little before the women and sat while they finished theirs. When they were done, he stood up and said, "I need to go home and recuperate. See you later," and then headed for the cash register. Twyla met Dave at the register and took the money from him. Once he was outside, Jen and Tina joined him, one on each side, and put their arms around his waist. He looked at each of the women but said nothing. He hugged each of them, and they all walked slowly toward his house. When they were in the backyard, Dave collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep almost immediately, barely noticing that both women had done the same, placing him between them again. They slept until almost noon, until nature called them again and they took turns going to the bathroom. Afterwards, they sat and drank iced tea. Dave said, "Were you girls just pouting your lips yesterday, or should I pay attention to some of the things you were saying?" Jen replied, "What things? I don't remember most of our conversation. I remember laughing and goofing around a lot, but I don't remember what we or anyone else said." "Well, you both said you wanted to sleep with me." "Oh, that? Yeah, but you already knew that, didn't you?" "No, not really. I mean, I knew you were teasing me, and I was trying to decide which one of you to ask out, but nothing more than that." "Dave, I think I remember us telling you it doesn't work that way. We both really like you, and we share. Neither of us have found anyone else we care about, and we love each other like sisters. We both want you, and we don't want to hurt each other, so we agreed to share you. Is that a problem?" "Well, yeah, no. Oh, hell, I don't know. I like you both a lot, but what about your parents and everyone else in town?" Tina replied, "What about them? It's none of their business. We know we can't marry you, but if we get along, nothing will stop us from living with you." The girls continued to help Dave with the renovations and played an increasingly active role in choosing the colors, decor, and even the finishes of the house. The first room they finished was the kitchen, and Dave found himself doing exactly what the girls wanted in it. From the kitchen, they moved on to finishing the master bedroom with a large bath made from the old living room and butler's pantry. Next on the list was the formal living room and then the dining room. Last to be finished was the small room the doctor used as his office. It had been converted into a nursery for future use. This completed the renovation of the lower floor just in time for Thanksgiving, when the first family dinner was held. Work began in the winter on the upper floor, where there will be 2 large bedrooms separated by a small playroom and bath. On Thanksgiving Day, one of the few days the calf was closed, the entire extended family gathered at Dave's house for a traditional meal. Jen and Tina's parents and siblings, as well as Dave's parents, came and filled the house to capacity. Most of them didn't understand how to feel about Dave having 2 women acting as his wives. In a surprisingly short time, the family and town accepted their different lifestyle and treated it as the most natural thing in the world. Dave and his women were happy and very successful. Jen graduated from college, as did Tina. Jen got a job at an inner-city school as a teacher, and Tina started working with Dave, programming all sorts of games and phone apps. The money kept coming in. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.